One of the most famous men on the planet was shot in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip, surrounded by friends, security, and hundreds of potential witnesses. And somehow, no one was ever arrested for his murder until very recently. For decades, the world has argued over different theories about what happened. Was it retaliation or a carefully planned hit? Did the people around Tupac know more than they admitted? And why did a case this public go so cold? But there's another part of this story that almost never gets talked about, which is that Tupac didn't die at that intersection, and it's why we're here today. He fought for 6 days for his life. Today we're going to walk through exactly what those bullets did to his body, why trauma surgeons made the life-altering decisions that they did, what was happening inside the ICU as doctors desperately tried to save his life, and what his autopsy showed nearly 30 years later, all from the nursing perspective. We'll also get into the crime scene, the investigation, and the arrest that shocked the world decades after everyone thought that this case would never be solved. So, today isn't about the rumors. This is about the evidence. What really happened to Tupac Shakur during those final 6 days of his life? Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. Today's video is going to be similar to the Selena and the Princess Diana video in that we will touch on some of the background and what transpired after, but the main focus for today is going to be focusing on what happened to Tupac when he lost his life and, of course, his autopsy. With that being said, let's get started. Lasan Parrish Crooks was born in East Harlem, New York on June 16, 1971, to a woman named Alice Faye Williams, who would eventually be known as Afeni Shakur. Afeni was a member of the Black Panther Party, and while she was pregnant with her son, she was actually on trial with the rest of the Panther 21 group. She was acquitted, and then she gave birth to her son about a month later. But when her baby boy turned 1 year old, she renamed her son Tupac Amaru Shakur after Tupac Amaru II. This man was an 18th century Peruvian revolutionary, and the name translates to the shining serpent. She said that her son was destined for greatness, so this was a name that she felt deeply connected to and that it fit him well. Tupac's childhood was unstable, and he moved around a lot as a kid. His mom struggled a lot with addiction as he was growing up, so the family bounced between New York, Baltimore, and eventually they landed in Marion City, California, always searching for stability that never quite stuck. In Baltimore, Tupac got into the Baltimore School of Arts where he studied acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet, and his old classmates said that he could recite Shakespeare from memory in one breath and then start freestyle rapping in the next. He made friends there who he stayed friends with for life, including Jada Pinkett, who you probably know as Jada Pinkett Smith. He never actually finished school there because the family moved out west, and Tupac talked about that move for the rest of his life as one of the most painful times during his teenage years. Shortly after moving west, though, his career took off. By his early 20s, he'd gone from a dancer and roadie for the group Digital Underground. Then he released his own album called Tupacalypse Now in 1991. His music mixed street storytelling with life, poverty, police violence, and what it actually felt like to be a young Black man in America. Activism was woven through his lyrics, and his mom instilled a lot of this in him as he was growing up. People that actually knew Tupac, though, said that he was a walking contradiction because he could be furious in his lyrics and then incredibly gentle and loving with the people that were close with him. His acting career also grew right alongside his music with roles in Juice, Poetic Justice, Above the Rim, and Gridlocked. His fame was rapidly growing around him, but so were the threats and violence against him. Tupac was involved in a shooting in November of 1994 at Quad Recording Studios in New York, and he was shot 5 times, then robbed in the lobby. This was a murder attempt against him, and remember this because it's gonna come back up later. He didn't let that stop him, though. He kept recording and touring and showing up to appearances and performances as soon as he got better. Tupac ended up serving prison time for a crime where he was convicted of forcing himself on a woman, which he denied until the day that he died. But it was during that Clinton correctional stay that his relationship with Death Row Records began. Now I need to introduce you to the notorious Marion Hugh Knight Jr., also known as Suge Knight. He co-founded Death Row Records back in 1991 with producer Dr. Dre, and by the mid-90s, Death Row was one of the most well-known, dominant labels in hip-hop. They had artists under its wing like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and even more artists in the West Coast rap golden era. Knight built that label's reputation on intimidation, though, just as much as he did talent. Stories about brutal contract negotiations and physical altercations followed him everywhere, and he was actually on probation for an earlier conviction too, which matters more than you would think for what's to come later. In late 1995, Knight helped post the $1.4 million bail that released Tupac from prison on one condition. Tupac had to sign with Death Row Records. He agreed, and that partnership existed for the rest of his life. Death Row Studios were armed with security because of its dangerous connections, and it had artists to protect, and people who worked in the studio with Tupac also said that it felt like something could go sideways at any moment. Even Tupac said that he felt like he'd traded one cage for another, but one came with way more resources and very little room to just walk away without getting seriously harmed. He almost felt as if he was more free in prison than he was at this time. Inside the studio, though, Tupac could finish a song in one single take, and he released the double album All Eyes on Me in February of 1996. It was a massive success. He also got pulled deeper into the East Coast-West Coast rivalry, which everyone knew was Death Row against Bad Boy Records. Bad Boy was run by Sean Combs, and its biggest star, Tupac's former close friend, the Notorious B.I.G., aka Christopher Wallace. Let me know if you want to see a video on him too. Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. were actually friends at one point, but that friendship quickly fell apart after the Quad Studio shooting because Tupac believed that Wallace and Combs had some kind of involvement or at least knowledge that people were coming after him. Both of them denied this their entire lives, though. Now, here's where things get complicated. Tupac was never officially initiated into a gang, at least that we know of, but he was surrounded by the Piru Bloods from Compton, which gave him a layer of protection. This also put him in harm's way that had absolutely nothing to do with music or his record label, which was of course dangerous. Someone else that we need to talk about before we get into what happened next is a man named Orlando Anderson, who was a member of the Southside Crips out of Compton. I'm sure that you've already pieced this together, but this would be a rival to the people that Tupac and Death Row Records were surrounded by and associated with. Orlando Anderson's uncle is Dwayne Keith Davis, also known as Keefy D, who was a longtime serious figure in the Crips. Davis went to federal prison when he was younger, and by the mid-90s, he was in and out of the music industry too. This is how he came to know Suge Knight. They had ties to rival groups, but these men knew each other by name, and they were kind of in each other's orbit. A few weeks before September in 1996, there was a fight at a local Foot Locker in Lakewood, California, where Anderson and his crew were accused of robbing a Death Row associate, and they stole his chain. This incident grew into something so much bigger. On September 7th, 1996 in Las Vegas, Mike Tyson had just fought a man named Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand, and for this weekend, the entire city was flooded with A-listers for the big fight. Suge Knight and Tupac flew in with a huge entourage from Death Row, and they had bodyguards and their affiliates there too to enjoy the big weekend. By that point, All Eyes on Me had become a major success, and it made Tupac one of the best-selling artists in the entire country. Despite the album doing well, he'd also quietly started to talk to people around him, saying that he wanted out of his Death Row contract. He started to record a new album that was known as the Machiavelli Project around this same time too. So, by September, Tupac was 25, being pulled into different directions, and here he was with his crew for this star-studded weekend. But underneath all the glitz and glam, people with old grudges were closer than most people probably realized. The night started at the MGM Grand, where Tupac and Suge went to watch the fight, but it turned out to be almost embarrassingly short. Tyson knocked Seldon out in the first round. This was so fast that a lot of people in the crowd hadn't even sat in their seats yet. So thousands of frustrated fans came pouring into the MGM's lobby and casino floor. And that's exactly where Tupac spotted Orlando Anderson. Security footage from the MGM Grand showed a quick fight near the casino floor. According to the people there, Tupac recognized Anderson from that Foot Locker incident and immediately charged toward him. Tupac and some of the other guys from Death Row, including some of Suge's guys, jumped Anderson, throwing punches and knocking him to the ground. And this was all before hotel security could break it up. The whole thing lasted just a few seconds, not even a full minute, and Anderson never pressed charges, so nobody was arrested. But this became one of the clearest pieces of evidence tying a retaliation motive to what is about to happen next. Tupac and Suge left the MGM not long after this, along with their entire entourage. They stopped at Suge's house to change and pick up more of the guys, and the plan was for them to go to Club 662. This was a Vegas nightclub that Suge actually co-owned, and it had become a regular spot for the Death Row Record people. The lineup of cars going out that night was pretty big too. Suge was driving a black 1996 BMW with Tupac in the front passenger seat, and there were several more cars behind them with bodyguards and other death row staff following. Tupac's personal bodyguard, Frank Alexander, had planned to ride with him that night, but Tupac actually asked him to drive in a different car instead, just in case they needed the extra room later. This meant that when Suge's BMW pulled onto Las Vegas Boulevard, Tupac was riding without the one person next to him that always kept him safe. This would turn out to be a fateful mistake. At around 11 o'clock that night, the convoy stopped at a red light on Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo Road, which was only a block off the strip, and it was packed with tourist traffic. The bright shining lights and excitement about going out were interrupted when a white four-door Cadillac carrying 4 people pulled up right alongside the BMW directly next to Tupac. The rear window of the Cadillac rolled down, and a shooter inside opened fire on the BMW, unloading a rapid burst of what witnesses said was about 13 rounds. The gunfire tore through the driver's side and rear side of Suge's car, into the frame and the windows, and both men inside of it. Tupac was hit 4 times with 2 rounds to the chest, 1 through his right arm, and 1 into his right thigh, and Suge was grazed in the head by a fragmented bullet. This wound was serious enough to cause some heavy bleeding, but not enough to stop him from getting them out of there. Suge punched the gas, then he made a sharp U-turn and sped west away from the nearest hospital. He said that he was just trying to put some distance between himself and the other Cadillac, but he was headed the opposite way of help. 2 Las Vegas Metro officers nearby heard the gunfire and they immediately called for backup, so 2 more officers picked up the chase following Suge's BMW. The BMW tires were hit as well, so they were driving away on flattened tires until it finally stopped at Las Vegas Boulevard and Harmon Avenue. When officers got to the car, they found Suge standing outside of it and Tupac slumped still inside, struggling to breathe, bleeding heavily and clearly in distress. Officers at the scene said that he was combative and disoriented too. Now, before you think, oh, he must have been okay then initially, Tupac was actually combative, and this wasn't a contradiction because of how bad his injuries were. It's actually exactly what we should expect to see given his injuries, because he was in fight or flight mode while in shock. Paramedics arrived, and they took him to University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, which was the only level 1 trauma center in the area, and it was just a few minutes away. At UMC, they took him straight into emergency surgery. Trauma surgeons worked hard to control the bleeding in his chest and his abdomen, and during that first operation, they removed his entire right lung, which had been catastrophically damaged. He was then placed into a medically induced coma to give his body the best possible chance at rest and recovery, and he stayed in critical condition in the ICU for the next several days. Death Row's camp and the hospital both gave very little updates to the public during this time. Outside, fans and reporters held a vigil, and inside, his mom, his girlfriend, and his close friends took turns being by his side. For 6 days, he held on and fought hard. Then, on September 13th, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Shakur died at University Medical Center at just 25 years old. This was right after his mom told the doctors to stop and to let her son rest. An autopsy was performed that same night by the Clark County Coroner's Office, and because he survived for 6 days in intensive care instead of dying at the scene, we're going to be talking about 2 overlapping stories at once. What the original gunfire did to his body, and then what 6 days of aggressive surgery and critical care did too while he was trying to recover. This is about to be a nursing heavy deep dive, so just get ready. Again, as a reminder, Tupac sustained gunshot wounds to his right hand, right hip, right chest, just under his right arm, and to the right thigh. Let's get started with the chest wound because it was the most critical, and it's the one that the surgical team went after first. The bullet that hit the right side of his chest caused a massive hemothorax. This means that a large amount of blood collected inside the pleural cavity, which is the space between the lung and the chest wall. In a healthy chest, the space is just a thin, lubricated gap that lets the lungs expand and contract regularly. When a bullet pierces the lung tissue, though, and the vessels around it, blood pours into that space instead of staying where it belongs, and it happens fast. A hemothorax is usually considered massive once it's over 1,500 milliliters of blood, which is a major amount of blood to lose internally. The lung on that side basically drowns in its own blood supply and then collapses under the pressure, which is exactly why controlling that bleed and re-expanding the lung was the surgeon's priority number 1. But in Tupac's case, the damage was too severe to save the lung at all, so the surgeons had to make the difficult decision to take it out entirely. When an entire lung is removed, the remaining one now has to handle the gas exchange for the entire body. In a stable, healthy 25-year-old, that is a survivable loss, but For a patient who's also actively losing blood elsewhere in the body, it's just one more system now running with way less reserve than it had before. Then there's the thigh wound, which is also more complicated than it sounds. The surgeons could feel the bullet in Tupac's abdomen, meaning instead of passing right through the thigh, it tracked upward through the soft tissue and it got stuck somewhere in the pelvis or in the lower abdomen close enough to the surface that they could actually feel it on exam. Surgeons ended up removing the bullet later on during the hospital stay during an exploratory surgery to see if it was causing delayed bleeding because he had ongoing complications. So, here's the bigger picture. Tupac's body was suffering from 4 separate traumatic injuries at the same time: a catastrophic single lung injury with a massive bleed into the chest, a thigh to pelvis wound with a retained bullet and possible vascular damage, a hip wound that required an additional surgery, and a defensive hand wound on top of all of that. This came from him raising his hand to shield and protect himself. Any one of his injuries could potentially be survivable, but all 4 together is an enormous amount for any body to carry, even with excellent level 1 trauma critical care. Over those 6 days, he continued to suffer from bleeding and complications, and managing a patient like this requires constant monitoring and interventions from the entire care team. Despite the hospital staff's ongoing best efforts, though, we know that Tupac succumbed to his injuries after hanging on for 6 days. University Medical Center's official statement listed his cause of death as respiratory failure and pulmonary arrest after being coded 3 times at the hospital. As a nurse looking back at this almost 30 years later, I want to add that every intervention here reflects a team making active, aggressive, correct decisions at every single level. Trauma medicine doesn't get nearly enough credit for the cases that it can't win, and this is absolutely a case where they didn't lose because of a lack of effort. Tupac was cremated shortly after the autopsy, and his ashes were actually smoked by members of his group, the Outlaws. This has been a highly debated topic that's surrounded by all kinds of theories and controversy too, but let me know your thoughts on this. Now, when it came to the crime scene investigation, the crime scene was genuinely difficult for investigators to work with. This shooting happened in a busy public intersection at night, packed with tourists and casino traffic everywhere. There were also 13 shots fired from one moving car into another moving car, which produced a wide scatter of shell casings and evidence all over the roads. And this was evidence that had to be recovered before traffic picked back up, so the clock was ticking. Investigators were also dealing with 2 crime scenes at once, which was the intersection where the shooting actually happened and the spot several blocks away at Las Vegas Boulevard in Harmon where Suge's BMW finally stopped. Evidence connected to the shooting was spread all across the whole distance, though, and the BMW's own trip through several blocks of city traffic afterward meant that any trace of evidence inside or on the car had even more opportunity to be disturbed before it was processed. Ballistic technicians recovered shell casings consistent with a .40 caliber handgun near Flamingo and Koval, and they also found bullet fragments in the BMW itself, which helped to confirm the caliber and weapon type, even though the actual gun was never found. The Cadillac was never recovered either or identified through registration, and that was the case for decades. Some of those answers would start to come once witnesses, not physical evidence, began filling in the details of what happened that night, though. It's pretty unusual for a shooting this public with this many potential witnesses on a busy intersection to go years without a recovered weapon or a vehicle. Most drive-by shootings, especially ones happening in environments with cameras and heavy foot traffic everywhere, leave behind at least one hard piece of physical evidence that eventually links back to the car or the gun. But this one didn't for decades, and that's because nobody with knowledge of where that Cadillac or Glock ended up was willing to say a single word to the police. Many conflicting stories and witness statements poured in, which only complicated the investigation and slowed things down even further. Investigators had to sift through different accounts of how many people were in the Cadillac, what they looked like, where they went, and even which side the shots came from. That kind of inconsistency is honestly really common in situations like this, though, because this was a traumatic event for people that were also near the experience in a very crowded place, and that can distort what they remember. Again, this slowed down the department, though, and that's before you even get into the much bigger problem, which was that nobody wanted to talk, at least not to the police. When Metro officers responded to where Suge's car stopped, members of Death Row's camp said not to cooperate with the cops, and that continued on for years. This kind of silence isn't unique to Tupac's case, though, because when a shooting involves both gang politics and a well-known public figure, Cooperating with the police can mean real, serious retaliation to anybody that talks. People in Suge Knight's circle felt that they had every reason to believe that talking to detectives would get them or their families truly hurt, and that fear doesn't go away just because it's a high-profile case. If anything, high-profile cases can make that fear even worse because everyone involved knows that the whole world is watching whatever they're saying or doing. Even though it took a few months, detectives were able to piece together that the shooter fired from the Cadillac's back seat and that the car fled south on Colville Lane right after the shooting. Figuring out who was actually inside took a lot longer, though, and that information wouldn't become public for decades. Police did question Orlando Anderson early on because of his fight with Tupac, if you remember, in the casino lobby, and that took place shortly before the shooting, but he denied any involvement, and without a cooperating witness, investigators couldn't build a case against him. Orlando Anderson would never be charged with any involvement in the murder of Tupac because he was killed in an unrelated shooting in Compton in 1998. Suge Knight gave police very little cooperation over the years, but he went on to get into a laundry list of trouble later on as well, including manslaughter charges for another case. Tupac's case sat open and frozen for decades, but that all changed between 2010 and 2020 when Dwayne Davis, or Keefe D, started talking, and he was saying a lot. First, in 2018, he wrote a memoir called Compton Street Legend. Then he did a string of interviews and podcast appearances describing his alleged role in providing the gun that killed Tupac to his nephew, Orlando Anderson, and he said that he organized the entire retaliation himself. I still can't believe that he admitted this publicly, but I wonder if maybe he thought he couldn't be convicted of anything because Anderson had been murdered, or maybe he was thinking of statute of limitations, but let me know your thoughts on that. What made his eventual prosecution possible wasn't one new big piece of physical evidence, though. It was actually just his own words accumulating over the years. He continued to give interviews that gave even more details about the vehicle, the gun, and the sequence of events that night. And for a long time, prosecutors hesitated to build a case around his statements that could have been maybe exaggerated for a book deal. They would need either physical evidence or a formal recorded admission before charges could realistically happen, but law enforcement eventually moved in anyway. Search warrants were executed at a home connected to Davis in 2023, and on September 29th of that same year, so 27 years after the shooting, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon in the murder of Tupac Shakur. He was charged in November 2023 and he pleaded not guilty. Prior to his arrest, though, a Nevada grand jury spent months reviewing evidence from the original investigation, including recorded interviews, plus crime scene and autopsy photos that had never been released to the public before. Since his arrest, he's remained in custody without bail. For many people who have followed this case, this arrest, or any arrest for that matter, was something that most people thought they would never see. But this trial, like many others, has faced repeated delays. It was originally scheduled for June 2024, but Davis's attorneys asked for more time to review the nearly 30 years worth of evidence. Davis also argued that waiting so long to charge him violated his rights, but the courts rejected that, and on top of that, he was convicted in 2025 over an unrelated jail assault after a fight with another inmate. Then changes to his legal team caused even more delays, so as of now, the trial is scheduled for August 2026, so very soon, nearly 30 years after Tupac was killed. The timing of today's video was entirely a coincidence, by the way. Tupac's been gone longer than he was alive at this point. The industry around him has changed almost beyond recognition, and several people at the center of this story, including Orlando Anderson, are already gone themselves. Tupac's mom sadly passed away in 2016 before she was able to see justice served for her son, and the courts are barely now getting close to justice for what actually happened that night. Tupac's music and legacy have continued to live on even after all these years, though. There are so many theories still attached to his death, though, like him possibly still being alive. So if you believe any of those theories, comment down below and let's talk about it. Tupac's body couldn't withstand the injuries that he suffered on that September night, but the work and artistry that he put in has outlasted just about everyone who was in that Cadillac, that BMW, and that hospital room. As always, I'm praying that he and his mom are resting peacefully together, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Keefe D's trial. Thank you so much for watching today's video and for hanging out with me as always. Let me know what your thoughts are after watching, and like I said, let me know if you've heard any of these theories that are out there surrounding what happened and what you believe and why. Please be sure to take great care of yourselves this week, nurses' orders, and do something good for your heart too. Also, don't forget our secret handshake, the butterfly in the chat, if you made it to this point of the video, and I will see you next time.